In this section, we're going to begin solving equations with decimals. In order to begin looking at this, it's important to understand that you're still going to solve the equations in the same way as you did numbers without decimals, but I think it'd be good if we do a quick little review of how do we go about adding and subtracting decimals and multiplying and then dividing as well. When we're adding and subtracting, the key is to line up the decimals. So for example, if I asked you what 3.21 plus 21.342 adds up to, I would start with the 3.21 because that's the first number. So I would be with 3.21, and to that I would begin with the decimal here, so the 1 would go here, the 2 would go here, the 3 and the 4 and the 2. And in order to add them, I would add a 0 here to hold the place, but I would make sure my decimals are all lined up. And then we just add normally. 0 plus 2 is 2, 1 plus 4 is 5, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 1 is 4, and 2 plus then up here, which is 0, would give me 2. So my answer here would be 24.552. 24 and 552 thousandths. So once again, the key part here for addition subtraction is to line up the decimals. Of subtraction, let's look at an example. If I say 12 minus 3.94, I would put the 12 here. If it's a whole number without a decimal, I need to think about there being a decimal after the 2. So therefore, then I would line up the 3.94 here. I would take and fill in my zeros here and put the subtraction. So I need to do 0 minus 4, which I can't do. I can't do 0 minus 9. So I would borrow a 1 from the 2. Move the 1 here. 10 minus 9 I can do, but I need to keep going, so that I need to change that to a 9. Borrow 1, 10 minus 4 is 6, 9 minus 9 is 0, 11 minus 3 is 8. So once again, I got my decimals all lined up. My answer will be 8.06. Now this becomes a little bit more complicated when I start dealing with integers, because now I might have negative 12 plus 3.94. So in your head, you need to think, okay, I've got negative 12 plus about 4, so my answer should be right around negative 8. So what do? Since I have different signs, I'm going to need to subtract them. So you're going to need to think about this like 12 minus 3.94. Fill in the zeros like we just did. Borrow. Subtract. But then no, you have to change your answer to negative 8.06. So this is why it's very important to know those rules for adding integers in order to be able to apply them to particularly adding and subtracting decimals. Okay. When we look at multiplication, works a little bit differently in the fact that you do not need to line up decimals. If I gave you 3.6 times 100, let's say 10.41, I don't need to line up the decimals. I'm going to put this as 10.41 times 3.6. You need to count the number of decimal spaces. So here I've got 1 space after the decimal. This one I've got 2 after the decimal. So for my answer, I need to move the decimal over 3 places. At this point, I'm going to completely ignore the decimals. I'm going to just multiply. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 times 4 is 24. Put the 4, carry the 2. 6 times 0 is 0. Plus 2 is 2. 6 times 1 is 6. Need to remember to move it over 1 space. Put the 0. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 4 is 12. Carry the 1. 3 times 0 is 0. Okay, plus 1 is 1. 3 times 1 is 3. I'm going to add here. Get 6, 7, 4, 7, 3. Then going up here, remember to move the decimal over 3. I start it here, go over 1, 2, 3 spaces. So my answer is 37 0.476. Does your answer make sense from a number point of view? If I round this to 3, this to 10, 3 times 10 is 30. It's right in the ballpark. Or if I think about rounding up 36, okay, 3.6, round up to 4, 4 times 10 is 40, so it needs to be between 30 and 40, so this kind of checks. Once again, if I were to make, when I start dealing with negative numbers, if I make this negative, my answer would then be negative. So remember that negative times a positive equals a positive times a negative equals a negative, 2 negatives equal a positive, 2 positives equal a positive. So same sign, keep sign, different signs, change, you've got to make it negative. I get to division. The key part is that you have to divide by a whole number. So if, for example, I gave you something like 14.22 and I want to divide by 0.9, this number here has to be without a decimal. So think about it like if I rewrite this in terms of a fraction, 14.22 divided by 0.9. If I was to multiply this by 10, I would get 9. So I would have to multiply this by 10, and I get 142.2. So basically what I'm doing, and how we set it up last year when we were learning this, it was 14.22 divided by 0.9. The 0.9 would go on the outside. If I would move this decimal over one space, multiply by 10, I would do the same thing, multiply by 10, and then I would move it straight up. So 9 goes into 14 one time. 1 times 9 is 9. Subtract 14 minus 9 is 5. Bring down the 2. 9 goes into 52 5 times. 5 times 9 is 45. Then I subtract, I have 7. Bring down the 2. 9 goes into 72. And it's going to be 8 times. So my answer is actually going to be 15.8. With this, it's going to be very important in a sense for you to keep the columns lined up. So 9 goes into 1 0 times. 9 goes into then 14 10 one time. Then I put the 5 on here. Then the decimal lines up there. And then I would get the 8. Okay? So it kind of lines up with whichever column that you're working with, which is a good thing to keep in mind. So anyway, hopefully this has been a good sort of review of decimals. You're doing the same thing with the equations as we did before, so I'm not so much worried about the process for solving equations as I am with making sure that you know how to solve or to handle the arithmetic with the decimals correct. So hopefully this has been a good review for you.